Good morning. Welcome to Adult Sunday School at Christ Church in Tyler, Texas. Happy New Year, Happy Epiphany. This morning our Bible study is going to be just a little bit different. We're going to have music this morning. This morning we'll be studying the Gospel in George Friedrich Handel's Messiah. And here's the schedule for the next few weeks. This is the study for Epiphany. This Sunday we have the introduction, and then you can see how the series will proceed. Why would we study Handel's Messiah? Well, this is from a friend of mine, Alan Ross, from a book he wrote called Recalling the Hope of Glory. He says, in addition to the individual praises and thanksgivings that maintain the reality of the faith, the praise of God may be expressed through hymns and sacred songs. I don't know about you, but that's something I've really missed during this pandemic. I think the music here at Christ Church, both downtown and at the South Campus, is fantastic. And singing and making music was a major part of the temple worship of Israel and was gradually adapted for synagogue worship. It was only natural that it would be continued in the church as part of its communal praise, since so much of early Christian worship was carried forward from temple and synagogue. And from Ephesians chapter 5, be filled with the Spirit. St. Paul says, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. And then in the letter of James, he says, is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise. Why Handel's Messiah? And why during Epiphany? You know, Messiah is normally performed during Advent. Well, for one thing, the lyrics from the Messiah are taken entirely from the Bible. And this study is going to combine the music of Messiah with the readings that follow the life of Jesus and the church year. It goes through, the Messiah goes through Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, and Pentecost. Handel's Messiah is the story of salvation, and the study of it really is appropriate at any time. George Friedrich Handel was born in Holla, Germany, in 1685. He was born into a devout Lutheran family. And he was a child prodigy on both the harpsichord and the organ. And he moved to Italy. He was attracted there for some reason, probably because of his interest in the Italian opera. And he lived there for about 5 years, but he became attracted to London, I think because of the music scene there. And the theater scene and the opportunities they provided. So he visited there in 1710, then moved there permanently in 1712. And he had been connected with George I before he was crowned king. And so Handel was immediately connected with the royal family. And he was so gifted, so talented, that he became a hit in England immediately and wrote Italian operas. He also became interested in the oratorio. We're going to talk about that in just a moment here. But so he wrote the music, but you know, the lyrics are, like I said earlier, entirely from the Bible. And they were given to Handel by a man named Charles Jennings. Very interesting man. He was born in Leicestershire. His family home was Gopsall Hall, born in 1700. And he was born into a wealthy family. They had made their fortune in iron manufacturing. And he inherited this large family estate in Leicestershire where he lived during the summer and fall months. But he went to London during the winter and spring months for the concert season, where, among other things, he could hear Handel. Now, he was educated at Oxford as a classical scholar, but he didn't get a degree because he wouldn't take an oath of fidelity to King George I. He was known as a non-juror. He felt that George I was a usurper and that his allegiance was to James II. But he became a Shakespeare scholar. He planned to do a complete edition of Shakespeare's plays with commentary, and he completed 5 volumes before he died. He was not awarded a degree from Oxford, but he was definitely a competent scholar, although he was criticized by some of his competition. And apparently he didn't have a particularly attractive personality. He had a reputation for vanity. And Samuel Johnson, one of his contemporaries, said that Jennings is a vain fool, crazed by his wealth, who, were he in heaven, would criticize the Lord Almighty, surrounded by all the luxuries of an Eastern potentate. And he said that he was remarkable for the number of his servants and the splendor of his equipages. And he said the chief error of Mr. Jennings' life consisted in his perpetual association with a set of men every way inferior to himself. And he said he preferred flattery in excess. He always traveled with 4 horses, sometimes with as many servants behind his carriage. And normally, as he traveled in London, a footman preceded him to kick oyster shells and other impediments out of his way. But Jennings was a devout Anglican. He was a scholarly, evangelizing supporter of the church. He left endowments for the church. He gave money to his family parish, and he wrote this, the lyrics, put together the lyrics for Messiah in defense of Christianity. Deism was rampant in England in the 18th century. Deism was a product of the Enlightenment. The deists believed that God created the world and then let it run according to natural law. Some of the deists were Voltaire, Descartes, Kepler, Galileo. They believed that God was like a watchmaker, the way a watchmaker makes a watch and then the watch runs on its own with no input from the watchmaker. They did not believe in miracles. They didn't believe in the supernatural. They believed that anything that couldn't be proven by man didn't happen. They did not regard Jesus as being divine. They thought he was a great teacher, a great moral leader, but not divine. And this deism was very, very popular in the 18th century, and it concerned Jennings. And so he put together these biblical verses for the Messiah. And his motto was Majora Conimus. That's Latin for let us sing of greater things. And then he quoted 2 Bible verses. 1 Timothy 3:16, great indeed we confess is the mystery of godliness. He was manifested in the flesh, vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. And then from Colossians chapter 2, verse 3, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So Handel's Messiah is the story of salvation. So Jennings delivered this libretto. In other words, libretto literally means little book. It's the lyrics for Messiah. Totally from the Bible. He delivered the libretto to Handel on August 22nd, 1741. And by September 14th, 1741, that's in 24 days, Handel had completed the music. He had put these lyrics to music. He had completed this magnificent work. And Messiah is an oratorio. It's a cousin of opera. It doesn't have acting or costumes and doesn't have stage props. And it's normally about religious things. So Handel's fortunes in London had taken a turn for the worse. Italian opera was not as popular as it had been when he first got to London. I think the British were tired of sitting through a performance where the lyrics were in Italian. They couldn't understand a word of it. And I think the general public just lost interest in the Italian opera. So he was invited to Dublin for the 1741-1742 concert season. And the Messiah was first performed during Lent on April 13th, 1742. And it was put together as a charity benefit. It was for the relief of prisoners in several jails and for the support of Mercer's Hospital in Stephen Street and for a charitable infirmary. And the advertisement for this performance requested that ladies would honor this performance with their presence and would be pleased to come without hoops. These are the hoops for their dresses, as it will greatly increase the charity by making room for more company. And then a later announcement said that gentlemen are desired to come without their swords, again for the purpose of making more room to increase the charity. In those days, the swords were mostly just for decoration. But this first performance took place at the New Music Hall on Fishamble Street during Lent, April 13th, 1742. The concert hall was packed, absolutely packed. And it's interesting the way all this came together. The soprano that performed in the concert was a woman named Susanna Sibbers. She was notorious. She was English and had married a man who was connected to the theater, and he was also a spendthrift. And the couple took a very wealthy man into their home who apparently began a romantic relationship with Susanna Sibbers. And Susanna's husband ended up suing this lover of his wife's, and it was all over the newspapers. It was the hot news in London. Everybody was interested, and of course that was the case in Ireland also. So part of the attraction, I think, for this first performance of Messiah was Susanna Sibbers. People simply wanted to come and see her. And so the first performance there in Dublin was a tremendous success. It was first performed in London in 1743 on the 23rd of March. It was repeated 2 more times during that season, but it didn't have the enthusiasm, the warm enthusiasm that it had in Ireland. But it was performed for the benefit of the Foundling Hospital, a hospital for children who were orphans or who had been abandoned in some way. The Messiah, though, became the chief work used in charitable fundraising. And I think that's what started this popularity. Charles Burney was an 18th century music historian. He said, "This great work has been heard in all parts of the kingdom with increasing reverence and delight. It has fed the hungry, clothed the naked, fostered the orphan, and enriched succeeding managers of the oratorios more than any single production in this or any country." Well, here is the outline of Messiah. And today, it's been heard by hundreds of thousands of people. There are very few symphony orchestras who don't perform this at least once a year. But the outline goes like this. This was actually provided by Charles Jennings, the author of the lyrics. Part 1, it's divided into 3 parts. And part 1 deals with the prophecy and realization of God's plan to redeem mankind by the coming of the Messiah. So it deals with prophecy and Jesus' birth. And then part 2 is the accomplishment of redemption by the sacrifice of Jesus, and mankind's rejection of God's offer and mankind's utter defeat when trying to oppose the power of the Almighty. And then part 3 is a hymn of thanksgiving for the final overthrow of death. And as I've said before, the libretto comes directly from the King James Version of the Bible, and except for the Psalms, which came from the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. The lyrics contain 73 total verses from the Bible, 43 from the Old Testament, 30 from the New Testament, 21 verses from Isaiah, 14 from Psalms. 1 Corinthians, there are 10 verses, and it's interesting, all of the verses from 1 Corinthians come from 1 Corinthians 15, which I would call the resurrection chapter of 1 Corinthians. And it's interesting, there are only 9 verses from the Gospels. So we're going to begin the study today. The only music we're going to hear today is from the overture. It's going to be our introduction. And the type of overture that Handel used comes from French opera. And the French opera would have been very, very familiar to the audiences in England. And this overture would have immediately suggested to Handel's audiences the pomp and ceremony associated with royalty. This overture prepares the audience for the coming of a king. And again, as we follow the church year, the Sunday before Advent is Christ the King Sunday. Well, let's just look at a couple of those readings from Matthew chapter 25, verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Christ the King. From Luke chapter 19, verses 35 through 38. And they brought it to Jesus, and throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road. As he was drawing near already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of his disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And now for the overture, I'm going to attempt to take you to Sydney, Australia, to the Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Philharmonia. This is an orchestra of about 65 people, but the choir has 600 members. So here we go. Let's listen to the overture from Handel's Messiah, and hopefully you'll join us next week as we begin the Messiah itself. Well, thank you for being with us this morning. Jesus is King. And next week we'll continue with Messiah and part 1. And we'll look at the prophecy about the coming of Jesus and about his birth. So I hope you'll join us next week. God bless you and stay healthy.